Greetings and welcome back to TMH English News with me, Delaytna Dawalko. New Alliance vows to establish transitional arrangements striving towards a democratic future. UN Security Council calls for the end to the fighting in Ethiopia. And the Globe reports of killings and of torture of Tigrayans in the secret Ethiopian detention camps. President of Tigray region, Debretsion has held very fruitful discussions with African Union Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Olusegun Obasanjo. Member of Tigray Armed Forces, Getachew Reda, who's also the advisor to the president, wrote on his Twitter account that Debretsion briefed the former Nigerian president on where Tigray stands regarding the ongoing crisis in Ethiopia. It was a good meeting, Getachew added on his Twitter. African Union Special Envoy Olusegun traveled to Ethiopia last week to help mediate to an end of the escalating conflict between federal forces, Tigray, and Oromo forces. U.S. Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, is also in the region for talks, and Feltman is currently in Kenya, where he's expected to meet with the President Uhuru Kenyatta after holding talks over the weekend with the Ethiopian government and the AU officials. Central Committee of the TPLF lauds members of the international community who, out of their principles stand of humanity, relentlessly voiced the untold justices and the injustices of 21st century against the people of Tigray. In a statement it released yesterday, TPLF Central Committee, however, indicated these voices of concern were not backed up by any action and prolonging the injustices and atrocities against the people of Tigray. It called for the investigation into all kinds of crimes against the people and by the impartial body and urged that urgent legal measures be enacted by taking into consideration the exacting situation in Tigray. Central Committee called on those who are intentionally or unintentionally taking part in the prolonging and the agony of the people of Tigray to take a pause for a moment and think twice to avoid being held accountable to history. In related news, President of Tigray says the people are transitioning into a new phase of struggle that enables them that once and for all closes the genocide project that posed a threat to their existence. We are now moving on to a stage where we'll lay the security and existence of our people on a solid foundation, Debretsion added. Debretsion stated in Tigray Armed Forces is built on the values of people and that the people of the government do not wish to allow to happen to others what they didn't want to happen to them. He also added, however, those who have been directly or indirectly involved in this genocide will be held accountable. The newly established United Front of Ethiopian Federalist and Confederalist Forces vows to form an all-inclusive national dialogue and a transitional government. This was announced last Friday in Washington when 9 groups of the opposing government signed an agreement declaring the formation of their new alliance.
We have agreed, among other things, to establish a joint command responsible for all-round engagements and to work jointly towards an all-inclusive national dialogues and the establishment of transitional arrangement with the view of addressing the political crisis affecting the country. Additionally, we have agreed to synchronize and share our human and material resources as is required to expedite the struggle against the tyrannical regime and to jointly work in apprehending and bringing to justice those officials of the regime and its collaborators in the gross human rights violations and genocidal crimes.
The Board Coalition of armed groups and political actors representing different regional and ethnic interests agreed to work jointly towards a unified struggle for democracy, equality, and self-determination that benefits us all mutually. The front urged all Ethiopians and all peace-loving people to categorically denounce repeated calls by the regime and its operatives for a wholesome war between the Ethiopian peoples. It condemned the concerted social media campaigns against a specific ethnic group, predominantly Tigray, and generally Benishangul Gumuz, Oromo, Kimant, and Agaw as well. The bloc said that it no longer recognized Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government is illegitimate, and they promised to defend the current Ethiopian constitution to change the current government by negotiations or by force. The new alliance called on all Federalists and Confederalists in Ethiopia to join it as well. In related news, representatives of the new alliance have made clear their intention to oust Abiy Ahmed. Birhane ገብረክርስቶስ, a former Ethiopian ambassador to the U.S., and Tigray officials said during the signing in Washington that the time is running out for Abiy Ahmed and his government.
The Abiy regime is pursuing the path of war. To this effect, definitely we in the United Front and others are trying to have a change in Ethiopia so that Ethiopia could stabilize and the region could stabilize. As he has consistently rejected and as he has consistently waging war on our peoples, we're forced to defend ourselves and will continue until that day. Unfortunately, time is running out. There is no much time for him to deliver things that he should deliver before going to negotiations.
He affirmed that the new alliances will push for a change in Ethiopia and before the country implodes. Mohammed Ugaz Mohammed, a representative of the Somali State Resistance, one of the coalition groups, talked of the next action plan.
The next step would be to reorganize ourselves and totally dismantle the existing government, either by force or by negotiation, whatever they wish, and then settle transitional government as soon as possible.
Commenting on the new significance of the new alliance, William Davison, a senior analyst with the International Crisis Group, told New York Times that this week that the coalition indicates political tides are changing in Ethiopia for good. The UN Security Council has called for the end to the escalating, continued fighting in Ethiopia. In only the second statement on Ethiopia since the fighting began a year ago, the 15-member council Friday urged all parties in Ethiopia to put an end to hostilities and to negotiate a lasting ceasefire.
The members of the Security Council called for refraining from inflammatory hate speech and incitement to violence and divisiveness. The members of the Security Council called for the respect of international humanitarian law, for safe and unhindered humanitarian access, the re-establishment of public services, and further urged the scaling up of humanitarian assistance. They further called to put an end to hostilities and to negotiate a lasting ceasefire and for the creation of conditions for the start of an inclusive Ethiopian national dialogue to resolve the crisis and create the foundation for peace and stability throughout the country.
Council members stated that the language in the statement was amended to remove a call for an immediate end to hostilities without any preconditions because of objections from Russia, according to the Associated Press. Tigray forces fighting Ethiopia's government have played down the reports that there would be a bloodbath if advances into Addis Ababa continue. Member of the Tigray Armed Forces Central Command Getachew Reda told AFP that the population in Addis is vehemently opposed to Tigray Armed Forces is absolutely overstated. Addis is a melting pot. People with all kinds of interests live in Addis, and the claim that Addis will turn into a bloodbath if we enter is absolutely ridiculous, he said. While the Tigray Armed Forces would enter Addis Ababa to overthrow Abiy Ahmed's government, Getachew Reda said taking the capital was not an objective. He also said that Tigray Armed Forces has no desire to take back the power in the city of Addis Ababa. A courageous singer destroys a rally for a war by singing peace. Tariku Gankisi, a famous singer who hails from the southern part of Ethiopia, preaches peace and reconciliation in a rally organized by the Ethiopian government yesterday to call the youth to take up arms and join the fight in the northern part of Ethiopia. Tariku shocked the government officials by saying, "Don't expect me to sing. This is not the time for singing and choiring. It's rather the time to weep. We should all be weeping." Officials in the podium appeared distressed. Mixed words of praise and murmuring were heard. Why always marching? Why always fighting? Who's going to the battlefields and dying in vain? He added. To the dismay of the officials, courageous Tariku said the youth should no longer go to the fronts. Let the elders go, holding the fresh grass and carrying the stone on their heads. And negotiation is the only way out of crisis, Tariku said, bashing the entire purpose of the demonstration. His microphone was being repeatedly switched off during the speech, and the guns should be silenced. War will not solve our problems, and war is not the solution, he concluded. Voices saying, hit the drums, stop his speech were heard from the podium where government officials were sitting, telling the music band to disrupt Tariku's speech. Then Tariku started singing. The song, too, was all about how he said he was sad and the war has destructive purposes, and how irresponsible calling young men to take up arms is. Tariku ended the song preaching an end to the war. The rhythm was of his famous song, Distagina, but the lyric of the song was entirely changed. He left the podium surrounded with angry-looking security officers, and many Ethiopians lauded Tariku's daring peace message as a rare voice amongst most of the Ethiopian artists who are beating to the drum of war. The Globe has reported killings and torture of Tigrayans in secret Ethiopian detention camps. Using satellite images based on maps and information from the detainees, the Globe has identified the location of 3 of the biggest detention centers. 2 of the big camps, named Awash Arba and Awash Sabat, are in Afar region, and the third one, Gelan Warehouse, is in the outskirts of Addis Ababa. Former detainees talked of torture in the camps crowded with hundreds of ethnic Tigrayan teens, as 12-year-olds were reported to be tortured as well. Disappearances, ethnic profiling, and mass arrests of Tigrayans have been increasingly common this year, especially after the territorial gains by the Tigray armed forces and the escalating civil war, according to human rights groups and other independent sources. This week, as Tigray forces advance closer to the capital of Addis Ababa, the cycle of detention is being repeated. The New York Times writes for the house-to-house searches, arbitrary arrests, and families cowering in their homes, dreading a knock on their door. Amnesty also warned of the significant rise in social media posts that incite violence against Tigrayans and use ethnic slurs against them as well. Ethiopian government officials have denounced Tigrayan leaders as cancerous weeds and as well as rats. By most estimates, thousands of Tigrayans have been arbitrarily detained since the war began in the Tigray region a year ago. On Tigrayan political party, Salsai Weyana estimates that 20,000 to 30,000 Tigrayans have been held at several different centrals outside of the main war zones. The Globe and the Mail interviewed 15 people whose families and members and friends disappeared after they were detained by Ethiopia's federal police over the past several months. The Globe also talked to people who has been released from detention camps after bribings, and with the use of smuggled phones, the Globe talked to detainees who are still inside these secret camps. The count by the detainees and their families all confirm that the partner of the torture and abuse at these detentions. Talking of the forced disappearance of his 2 relatives, one witness said they never appeared in court, they just vanished from the police station. Using a smuggled phone, the Globe talked to a 23-year-old Tigrayan detainee at Awash Arba, and he had worked as a day laborer at a construction site in Addis Ababa until he was arrested almost 5 months ago. He estimates that there are about 900 Tigrayan detainees at the same camp. They beat us every day, he said. They harassed us and they threatened to execute us, and it's so difficult I have no words to describe the suffering. We're all low-profile Tigrayans with no military or political background or social media engagement, and we have never appeared in court. Some detainees released after paying bribes said they sometimes heard gunshots at Awash Sawat, and camp feared people were being executed. A Tigrayan man who spent 3 weeks at the Awash Sawat camp until he paid a bribe of 81,000 bir, also $2,100, for his release said he saw five young detainees being taken to a room where gunshots were later heard on the night in early August. Other witnesses described several shootings at night, including that day's incident. The Globe contacted Belena Siyom, a spokesperson for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, to seek comment on the allegations in this article, but she did not respond. Scholars and researchers from 21 countries appeal for an end to the blockade in food and medicine in Ethiopia. The researchers have joined hands in calling for the end to the blockade and food of medicine. After a year of war, Tigray has been devastated and cut off for months, and humanitarian deliveries to the neighboring regions are also threatened. The researchers recalled that a year ago they warned warfare will not be a viable solution for any of the involved parties, and Tigray was the one heading for famine at levels that will revival the disaster from the year of 1984 to 85. Our worst fears have been exceeded, and the situation is still deteriorating faster than ever, they stated. They particularly drew the attention of the world to the fact that women, children, and the elderly are dying needlessly in the country. And Ethiopia has the highest number of starving people on the planet and the largest active ongoing war, as the researchers said, and called on all parties to pursue political settlement and political problems to cease fire and negotiate. But lifting the blockade on people who have been starving for months cannot and should not be for waiting for negotiations, and must happen now, and it must happen first, they stressed. They put on the onus on the Ethiopian government to allow adequate food, fuel, and medicine to reach to the people in those growing areas which it does not control. They also called on their own government and the UN bodies to do much more to achieve this, to prioritize full access for the life-saving amenities. The researchers said the international law includes the international responsibility to protect, and withholding food from civilians during war is an absolute crime. That wraps up our news for the day. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.